Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Rob Pasick, Dr. Rob Pasick. I'll tell you about Rob in just a moment. Those of you who know the show know that we've talked to folks like Rob who are thinkers and doers and leaders. And Grace Under Pressure focuses on the stuff that we dismiss too often. You know, the soft stuff, the caring, the connecting, and the commitment we feel toward others. Grace for me is generosity, respect, compassion. And for leaders, it's acting for the benefit of all and doing so to energize the organization. Welcome, Rob.
Welcome, John. Good to see you.
Great. I want to tell folks a little bit about you. Sure. Rob is a Harvard-trained psychologist and executive coach. Rob earned his Ph.D. at Harvard. I think it was just a couple of years ago. He is also a pioneer in the field of executive coaching, and he's appeared on Oprah, the Today Show, and has been a featured guest on NPR. He's also a faculty member of the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. He has taught hundreds of students, and I know they love it, and he's worked with lots and lots of executives on emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and positive psychology. Rob's the author of 9 books, and he's also a researcher. Welcome, Rob. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Nice to see you, John. Thank you for having me on.
Well, Rob and I have known one another for quite some time, some 20 years. We both live in Ann Arbor, and Rob has been a real friend to me. And we'll go on and say, Rob, executives are under a lot of pressure today. What are you hearing?
I'm hearing that the pressures are manifold because they have pressures about trying to keep work going and teams going without having access to the teams in person. They have all the worry about the economy. They have all the worry about gender and race issues that are going on. So there's just a lot on their plate. And what I see that they're working an excessive number of hours, which is really stressing them out, stressing their families out.
Right. What advice do you give them? Mellow out? Take time off?
Well, partly the biggest advice I give most leaders is to try to find people on their team that could take the slack. I think the people that are the worse off are the ones who try to do it all themselves and don't listen to other people. So really the only other way to manage that is to delegate important things, not just the minuscule things, but really try to delegate important things to team members. And that depends on how well they've developed those teams over the years. Some have done really well, some have not done so well. So we're seeing those things happen now.
Great. What about the challenge? You know, Rob, I've known you for more than 20 years, and I know that when 9/11 struck, you were a volunteer. You went to New York City and you did some coaching and counseling. So lessons learned there applicable to today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I saw there when I worked with the companies that were not devastated by the attacks, but they had to get up and running. Like Reuters was a company that supplied a lot of the data to the news feed, so they had to get up and running. They did lose 7 people, but this was out of 20,000. So but they said that I talked to Phil Lynch, who was the chief executive, and he said, I wish I could get the company to work at this level all the time because we work so well together. And I'm hearing that from other people now that they're working at a speed and an efficiency that they've never achieved before because they're under stress and they know they have to pull through and they don't have any options. So there's no playing around. There's no, politicking. It's just a matter of let's get the job done. So I think that's what I've seen there.
Good. What about the isolation? With 9/11, at least there were physical community. We're not having that now. So,
I'm finding a lot of people are actually getting enjoyment out of being around the people that they love, those people that are not living alone. And generally they're getting together, kids that come back home. So it's not so bad for some of the leaders. I think the women are very, very stressed. Mostly it's women, although many men are involved too, but in trying to do the parenting of school age children. And it's not so much isolation as it is that they're trying to do everything over the computer. And that's very, very hard. I'm going to visit my son who lives in New York City next week. And he and his wife both work full time. Actually, he works for the New York Times, so today is a really stressful day for him. But they're trying to manage two preschoolers. One's in first grade, one's in preschool. And two jobs in a small apartment in New York City. So
that's tough. I've said this before, and I honestly mean it. I think the parents who are working full time and managing their children's education at home full time are really unsung heroes, and they deserve recognition. And it's tough. It's really tough. So.
It's really hard. And then the other thing is that the people who live alone are suffering.
Right.
So we don't talk a lot about that, but I don't know what percentage of it is, but it's a fairly big percentage of people who live on their own.
Yeah.
And many of those people have been completely isolated. They only see the delivery person, and they maybe haven't even seen friends. Yeah. Now that it's getting winter, they're afraid they won't see anybody at all for a long period of time. So let's not forget those folks as well.
It's also physical touch, no hugs and things, and that's really hard.
We had friends who had a baby born during this time, and they couldn't touch the baby for like a month because the baby was healthy. They were healthy, but the doctor said, let's just not have any risks here. So they had this baby, and they couldn't touch the baby for over, a month. I think it was at least that much time.
Yeah, that's challenging. So you mentioned because I know you work with CEOs as a coach, and the higher up you go the ladder, the more isolated you are. So what about the isolation of a leader, if you will? So,
well, again, I found, there's some positives. I talked to a leader of an insurance company, and he felt like his team was working best that they ever have, working through remote. They haven't seen each other for months, but suddenly the team has clicked and everybody's working well. He doesn't feel as isolated. He feels like he's a member of a team, so it's not like him making decisions all alone. So I think that those companies, those leaders are surprisingly benefiting from some of these changes. People talked about making changes for a long time, John.
Yeah.
And then this kind of forced them into it.
Yeah. Well, you've said something interesting that
I said something interesting.
You say lots of interesting things, Rob. About the team, is this leader that you were referring to, is he acting more as a team member as opposed to the boss?
He is. I mean, it's funny how everybody shows up on the screen. Everybody's equal. Everybody's in a little box. It looks like celebrity bingo or something. But we then, I think people do feel like they're more of a team, and they know they cannot function all by themselves. They can only answer so many emails and take so many calls. Yeah. And I'm talking about men that are leaders, but I work with many women leaders too, and they're experiencing the same thing.
I'm glad you mentioned the screen size. A colleague of mine who I interviewed, Cynthia Burnham, talks about, and she specializes in presence and communication, and she talks about the Zoom or our video chats as a leveling, because the CEO is the same size as a frontline worker or a middle manager, and we're all up just what you said. And I think that's an interesting point. There's and from that leveling, we're all in this together. Would you say that, Rob?
I think that's true. I think you remember, John, Marshall McLuhan?
Of course.
And he was a media I guess a knowledge leader, thought leader, and talked about the medium as the message. Well, think about that today. The medium that we're communicating with is a screen. Yeah. So that's the message. We're all equal on that screen. Nobody is above somebody else.
And there's something interesting also about that, at least initially during it. You're seeing the CEO or senior leader in home, and there may be a child or a dog or a cat or whatever in the background, or they're just like me, which is actually
I'm looking at myself and I'm having a really bad hair day.
You look terrific. So what about the coaching? I mean, you are an expert coach. You teach coaches and all of this kind of stuff. So what lessons in coaching are you seeing in the 8 months of our crisis?
Well, I think one of the big lessons is the lesson of humility. And I know you talk a lot about grace, and I think one of those things is to be humble. And I think this whole thing has humbled leaders because there's a sense of like, I could do it all. I could do everything. I could overcome any obstacle. I'm Horatio Alger. Sure. And I think this has humbled people and recognized that there are forces out there that are way beyond our control. and also our importance is not as big as we thought it was. I mean, that there's people dying, there's people that are very ill, and so whether we get this this product to market, the software product to market in time, maybe isn't as crucial as we thought it was. So I think people are learning humility.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, Rob, because I just did a little video. I haven't released it yet, but I'm sensing that people are cutting one another slack. It's just what you just said about the deadline. Okay, yeah, it was important, but we'll do it. We'll make it. Do you sense that? Do you think we're cutting one another?
Yeah, that's a good term, slack. And I think we're all working really hard and working as hard as we can. But people recognize that they're more tired, that people have limits, that people have a life beyond the office. And so we are cutting people slack. I mean, if you mentioned, a little girl running onto the screen, well, the executive is not going to stop and say, go away, honey. You're a 3-year-old. I mean, you're going to have to take care of that. That's a priority. Right. So I think that we're learning. We talk about balance, but actually we see people living in balance. We see it up close and personal.
Now, I want you to put your clinician hat on right now.
All right.
One of the things we're all experiencing, as you know, anxiety. So what do you advise leaders to do to deal with people suffering from anxiety? And do you have thoughts on that, Rob?
Well, I think the first thing is the leader should deal with their own anxiety and recognize that if they don't have anxiety, there's something wrong with them, because we're living in an extremely anxious time. And if you're not anxious on election day, I don't care which side you're on, you're going to be, I feel my heart thumping in my chest here. So I think that, first of all, recognizing it in yourself, and then also dealing with it in yourself. One of the best ways of dealing with it is not trying to hide it. We live in a culture where we're supposed to cover up all those negative feelings, especially men. We're not supposed to share that we're nervous or we're not certain. We're supposed to have all the answers. We'll be the big oak tree. And now we're really swaying in the wind, and we recognize that we do not have control. And not having control makes us anxious. Yeah. Everybody's anxious about getting sick. I mean, we all have the same anxiety, and that's a big one. That's different in our culture. Nobody's ever had the same anxiety, and it doesn't matter rich or poor, you have the same anxiety. I think poor people have to be a little bit more vulnerable because they're maybe taking public transportation or having to work in hospitals, but we all face the same thing. In terms of dealing with anxiety, one of the best things, John, is sleep. I think that a lot of people are now reporting that they didn't realize they needed 8-9 hours of sleep. It's nothing unusual to have 10 hours of sleep. Well, you go back to a year ago and you ask people how much hour. Oh, I get by on 6 hours of sleep. No, you don't really. You need more. And so I think people are enjoying that time to sleep, and that's one of the best ways to deal with anxiety.
That's great. And also, I mean, and then there's and to press a little bit more. Yes, we're all feeling anxious, and I'm glad you said if you're not feeling anxious, then there's maybe something a little wrong. But at the same time, there's clinical anxiety, and so. Yeah. And now that's beyond a leader's bailiwick, but he or she can make it safe for someone to seek help, and no stigma, no shame.
Well, and that's where health insurance comes in, because a lot of people are worried about the stigma and shame, but they're also worried, how are they going to pay for it? I think there is lower rates for therapy now that are available through different websites. And most of the therapists I know, including myself as a coach and a therapist, are only working through Zoom. So sure. That field is also being radically changed. And I think people who before maybe thought it was too much to get to a therapist's office and it was too expensive, realize that maybe this is a good thing, and they're trying that out now. And it's revolutionizing therapy, and I think we'll never go back to the old way.
Right. I interviewed Anna Useem, who is a psychiatrist practicing in New York. And she said, I mean, obviously due to COVID, she switched all of her practice to video chat, and yeah. Some of her patients were, reluctant, but most everybody embraced it. So yeah. Now you as a coach or as a therapist, what's the dynamic that you see in video versus face-to-face?
I think where it's hardest, I have some clients that I've never met, people who've come on board since COVID started. And
Well, since I know you, Rob, I think that might be a benefit. No. I'm just teasing.
But I'm used to looking at a lot of cues, and when you're on Zoom, all you do is basically see somebody's head, and also you see people paying attention in ways that they're not looking around, they're not fidgeting. So there's a important part of data that is missing from the therapist's ways of assessing people. But otherwise, I think it's been fairly good. I mean, I feel like I'm able to connect with people. We do not waste time. We're not talking about irrelevant things. We're really dealing with things. And even over the phone, it works well.
Right. And I've heard some have said, and I don't know what your opinion on this, that with video or Zoom or whatever might be a greater sense of intimacy. Do you think there's anything in that, Rob?
I don't know about that, John. Okay. I don't know what that really means, intimacy. I mean, people, share, and I think that there is probably more intimacy to me when you're seeing people face to face, and you could be more subtle. I mean, you're not touching people or whatever, but still, I just feel like that is more intimate of an experience than Zoom.
Now I want to go back in history a little bit, only a few years for you, Rob. When you were at Harvard, you trained under one of the most famous organizational psychologists in the world. And it's, tell us about that. Tell us.
John, you're not going back far enough. When I was living in England in the middle century, it was Merlin that was one of the first psychologists, and he was very, very effective, I thought. Me and Sir Galahad learned a lot from him.
All right. Yeah.
But you're probably talking about David McClellan.
Yes, I am.
Was a very famous psychologist at Harvard, and he developed the whole idea. One of the first pioneers to talk about competencies, and he talked about the competencies of emotional intelligence. So Daniel Goleman was one of my classmates. Daniel went on to write several books on emotional intelligence and is kind of the guru of that in today's world. So I learned a lot from David about assessment, about a bias for example, we were in Boston, and they had tests for people to become firemen. And it turned out only the Irish could pass these tests,
I wonder how that could happen.
I don't know. So David said, well, let's really look at what competencies are required to be a fireman, and not so much. And competencies are, being calm under fire, having a kind way with people, having physical agility. And when they started to use these competencies to measure who should be on the fireman, there were a few Irish guys, but a few other people also made the grade. So it started to change the way people were hired. And we still do that competency-based hiring much more today than we ever did.
That's a great look back. I'm going to jump back now. While you are a therapist and an executive coach, you also teach at Michigan. Yeah. What do you hear? And you teach undergrads, am I correct?
That's correct, yeah.
What are they? Are you teaching this term, Rob?
Actually, I'm not teaching this term. So,
but what are you sensing when you teach the undergraduates? What I know you enjoy it, and what lessons do you have from that?
I'm finding that people are taking things a lot more seriously. Being at Michigan is kind of, or any college, is kind of a lark, and I actually worked with quite a few of the football players, and that was fun. And but now that they're looking at it, they say, well, let's take care of business. I don't need to go back to college, So there are a few of my students decided to go to the pros right away because another year of college wasn't going to do a whole lot. Mm-hmm. And I think that the students are very involved in the election, and more than ever. It's great to see that kind of involvement. I haven't seen that since the 60s. So I think they recognize that they really are needed in the culture, and it's not about waiting till later, but it's about stepping up now and doing what you can with what you've got at the moment.
That's reassuring. Now I'm going to jump to, you are also very much a communitarian. You run an organization here in Ann Arbor called Leaders Connect. Tell us about that.
Leaders Connect is something I started probably 30 years ago in a small fashion. It just kind of has grown to now where it's we get 100 people a month, or now we're doing it virtually, and it's we get 50 people every couple of weeks. But it's a network, a learning network where people who are in leadership roles come together. And the difference is that we have leaders from the for-profit community, like Lamasoft, which was just sold for $1.5 billion. But we also have leaders from the nonprofit world, like the Crisis Center, the University of Michigan Musical Society. We have educators like the heads of school districts in Saline and Ann Arbor, and we have also younger people who are leader in the community in college or high school. All come together. We did meet face to face for many years, and now we're meeting virtually. And we have a speaker. I think you've been a speaker at some of these, John.
Very kind to me.
About your books.
And whenever coming out, Rob, you said, "Come on down." So I say thank you.
So why do we give young leaders an opportunity to speak? If anybody's interested in participating in that, just email me at robpasick.com. Maybe you could put that on your website, John. Yep. And I'm happy to put you on the invite list. And we've got something coming up in a couple weeks. And it's just really good stuff that we share with people. And get opportunity to teach others.
Right. And I think the other benefit of course, of learning from you, Rob, is that you are bringing all the leaders together and they create community. Mm-hmm. And so they meet and mingle and learn from one another. Am I correct on that?
That's right. I mean, they're some are making connections that turn out to be business. I mean, you probably met people there that, you then consulted to around coaching and speaking. They develop mentorship opportunities where younger people are being mentored by older people. We do a lot with diversity. We try to bring in a diverse group of people to mingle, but also to speak. And we've started another Leaders Connect in Detroit, which is just now getting off its feet. And we have great sponsors for that. So it's community sponsors like Bank of Ann Arbor and Sigrid Solutions, Zingerman's, and they all, kind of contribute to this sense of community, which I know has been a big thing for you, John. When you talk about grace, I think about people can't be just individually thinking about that. They've got to think about it from a community standpoint. What does it mean to give and to receive? And that's all very important.
Absolutely. I mean, the theory of grace for me is a catalyst for the greater good, and it enables us to create a greater sense of connectedness, which ultimately results in community. So narrowing it back here just a little bit, I know for years, decade maybe, you've worked on stress. So how is that? That's got to be key work that you're doing right now. So.
John, I will talk about stress in just a second, but there's one other thing about community that I want to share, and that is, sure. I think the COVID has helped neighborhoods grow stronger.
Oh, and in what way?
We get to know each other. We rely on each other. People are out walking. People are stopping to talk because they have time when they're taking their garbage out on whatever day that may be.
Sure.
So I see strengthening of just in our block here.
Mm-hmm.
I know many more people. We have probably 30 houses on this street, and I know probably everybody now in these houses. And it reminds me of when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, where I could name everybody who lived on my street. I don't think a lot of people can do that. So right now, we're relying on one another, and that's in the neighborhoods. I'm going shopping. Can I pick something up for you? To an elderly person. So transitioning to stress, I think relief, having a sense that you are part of a community, that you're not alone in this, does provide a relief from stress. Mm-hmm. That I think the most terrible feeling of stress is like I'm in something and I'm all alone. I have nobody to go with me. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, very sad thing. Even around the election, I think I've seen community building and people relying on each other. My wife, Pat Pasick, has been doing the helpline, and she had somebody call today who was in the ICU at a hospital and needed their help to figure out how to vote because his ballot was at home.
Yeah,
so that's community. He called a hotline. They called Pat. She called somebody else, and that person who is alone did not feel so alone because they had a team of people. He found a team of people that were working with him to help him vote.
What a great thing. And I like the way that That is true community, and it reaches people at their perhaps most vulnerable, but it also is that reassurance that you aren't, as you said, not alone. You're part of the community, and there is comfort and strength in that.
Right. Yeah.
And
There's a song from Wicked. It says, I think it's Stephen Sondheim, "No one is alone." It's a beautiful song. And I think that, we're learning in this, you can't really be alone. You can't be a lone leader. You can't be, a lone tree. And then, you need other people around, other trees around to help you be strong. And those that I think are suffering the most are probably the people who are isolated right now.
right. Related to coping with stress is a topic I know that you've taught, resilience. Tell us about resilience and how it plays out in how you coach.
Well, I learned a lot about resilience. Probably the most I learned was when I worked in Rwanda after the genocide.
Yes.
And, that was probably the most devastating genocide of all time in modern history. 1/10 of the people were killed, and they were killed by neighbors, not by, imagine like we talk about worrying about Democrats and Republicans right now. Well, that's kind of what the genocide was. People just decided one group was better than the other, and they started to kill the minorities.
Right.
So I went there probably 10 years after the genocide and tried to find ways for people to reconcile with each other. And these are people who had to talk to people who killed their brothers and sisters, but they had to live together again in this country. So they have found a way to do that most effectively. And I think that's probably where I learned most about resilience, that even when you face the worst imaginable situation that you can, there's a way back. As long as you keep going, keep acting, keep talking to people, there are solutions. So I think people are finding that today. They have to be resilient about the economy, but there's also the people who've had the virus and have come back from it. They were on ventilators. Now, some of those people died. Many of them are back. They've recovered, and they're out today in the world. So this is truly resilience.
No, that's great. And I think resilience is something that we are learning more about and practicing. And I think leaders need to teach it, or at least by example, and how important it is. It's that ability that to bend but not break. But Eileen McDarg, you may know her work, has this philosophy that resilience is also bouncing forward. And you come out changed, and so that's interesting.
I believe it's really crucial to teach it to your children, because if you come out of a growing up experience and you haven't become resilient, it's very hard to pick it up later. I grew up in a pretty anxious household. Mm-hmm. I don't know where I learned resilience, because it wasn't taught in my household. I mean, everybody in the house was nervous or anxious about something. But I think I learned early on, and maybe through some of my mentors, that you just had to keep going and you had to keep acting. The worst thing to do is not do anything.
Right.
Sometimes you do the wrong thing, but that's better than doing nothing.
Absolutely. Rob, you have been a terrific guest, but I like to, and we're winding down, I want to ask you a story of grace. Is there something you'd like to share? So,
John, tell me what you mean by grace before I go into
grace is that catalyst for good. So it's anything is an expression of kindness, compassion, generosity toward others. It's unexpected. And the folks I've talked to on this show, they've noted it, that they've been beneficiaries of it. Some of it have been in life and death situations. Yeah. Others, it's been simple. Someone, was kind to them at an airport and it meant something. These can be big things and small things.
Well, I've got a 98-year-old mother-in-law, Jean Carino. I guess I would think about her as being a person of grace. She has been kind to people. She will not say a bad word about people. She won't take sides on things, which sometimes can be maddening, because you're right, and yet she won't. And she's really just kind of like got a pocket full of nice things that she's willing to dole out to people and be generous to. And I think it's enabled her to be the longest living person ever in her family. To have that, it's a life prolonging trait.
Well, what a wonderful story, Rob, because I like to say grace is generative.
Yeah.
Part of our generosity. And your mother-in-law, and how kind of you to salute your mother-in-law.
It's unusual.
Yeah. And
he's paying me for that, John. I get chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, I had a great relationship with my mother-in-law too. But so, it's generative. And, I'm sure that your mother-in-law's kindness toward others has helped her too. It's sustained. And that's positive. And that's the beauty of grace.
She's lived longer. She's the middle child of about 9, and she's the only one still living. So,
right.
Something is happening. Right?
98. God bless her. Rob, you've been a terrific guest. How do we find you? And I will put this connection information in.
You can find me on robpasick.com.
Okay.
ROBPASICK.com.
Great.
And I'll be there. At least virtually, I'll be there.
All right.
You can go there, and then if you want to contact me directly, you can do it through the website.
Okay, great. Rob, it's been great, and we're going to sign out here. You've been a terrific guest. We've had a good conversation, so thanks, my friend.
All right, John, and